I have an audience of three cats. So this week I did something that I am not I don't think I've ever done this before. And I didn't do it on purpose until like Wednesday, and then I was like I had to lock in because I can't ever do anything normally. Um so what I've done this week is I've read a book every single day this week. And something I've never done before and probably will never do again because it was really stressful to wake up this morning and know that I had to read one more book. Otherwise, my whole week was a failure. Now I have to think of an intro. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. This is Abigail's Bookshelf, where I will just do book reviews and it won't be anything more complicated than that. So starting with Sunday, the first book that I read this week was Harriet Tubman Live in Concert by Bob the Drag Queen. It didn't work for me. It didn't work at all. So the premise is that some sort of fantastical event has gone on and brought back historical figures from the past. So Harriet Tubman asked Darnell, who is a record producer, to help her produce an album. That being said, the novel it didn't work for me. It didn't work at all. I think the main issue was it was trying to be too much at once, and it was only 4 hours. So I think that's maybe like 250-ish maybe pages, if that much. So it was a really short novel. The first part was kind of Darnell getting to know Harriet and like getting to know her band and like getting to know the music. And then the second part, we like pivoted into Darnell's grappling with his sexuality in the music industry. And then the third part where like we went back to Harriet Tubman and there was like this huge time jump, and it just like seemed like way too much. There was way too much going on. And so because of that, I didn't feel like each part got the screen time it deserved, because like everything was just like so it was spread so thin on the ground. And I have to say this as someone who writes fantasy and who like devours fantasy. I am always going to really struggle with a book where something magical happens and they're just like, oh, it just happened and we're not going to talk about it. And there was like no explanation about why Harriet Tubman came back from the dead and wanted to write a musical. So that was a little bit lost on me as well. I didn't love that. I think the novel overall, in what it was most successful, was that Bob very clearly like loves Harriet Tubman and loves these abolitionists, and it was very much a beautiful love letter to this person. So like I love the like self-indulgence of like if this historical figure I love came back, what would I do with them? And so I loved like the premise of it. I just feel like the execution was a little bit off. It was a little bit unstable. I think it would have been better if the whole novel had been just focused on Harriet Tubman, and then Bob wrote a second novel about, or maybe like a sequel or a spinoff about Darnell and like queerness in the music industry, especially as like a Black male. But overall, it was great as an audiobook. If you are curious about it, I recommend listening to it as an audiobook because Bob is such a good performer. That was Sunday. So Monday, I read A Charmed Life by Dianna Wynne Jones. She is a witch with really big ambitions. So Charmed Life by Dianna Wynne Jones is a children's fantasy novel about a young boy. I think he's 7. His name is Kat, and his sister Gwendolyn. And in the very first chapter, they are orphaned very intensely and very violently. But they both managed to survive, and so the rest of the novel is kind of about their the subsequent, I would say maybe like a year to a couple of months of their life following this event. And Gwendolyn, his older sister, is a witch, and she is not only a witch. She is one of the most intense people I have ever read in my life. And this is a children's novel, by the way. But she wants to be rich and famous by any means necessary. And she believes that she is like the greatest witch of her age. And she will do anything that she can to kind of be successful. So shortly after the children are orphaned, they are adopted loosely, by a man called Crestomancy, who is a magician that is mysterious and extremely powerful. And so they moved to his home. It's like an English countryside manor. The vibes were immaculate. Kat is running interference on Gwendolyn and trying to make sure she doesn't kill everyone because Christomancy tells Gwendolyn she's not allowed to use magic. And Kat, by the way, does not have any magic, just Gwendolyn. And Christomancy is like, you're not allowed to use magic anymore. And also, I am uninterested in you as a person. And that Gwendolyn took that personally. And she took that so personally. So she does this kind of like reign of terror. And like, I think if I would have read this as a child, I would have been like, I would have had nightmares, I think. But overall, really cute novel. It was not, to me, it was not as good as Howl's Moving Castle. I am a big Howl's Moving Castle girl. I love Howl's Moving Castle. I love the film. I love the book. I love it so much that I named my cat Hal. And he's staring at me right now because I keep saying his name and he doesn't understand why. But it had kind of this, if you like that sort of vibe, then Charmed Life, I think, would be something that you enjoy. There are, I think, like 4 or 5 Crestomancy novels that take place in different parts of Crestomancy's life. I'm not sure if Kat shows up again, but I know the second book is Crestomancy as a child. So it's kind of like his origin story. And so I hope that there is some overlap with Howl's Moving Castle because I know that Diana Wynne Jones kind of lets all of her characters play in the same worlds. And she does a lot of portal fantasy. And so it's not unbelievable that they would kind of bump into each other. But yeah, it was really cute. It was definitely one that I wish I would have read as a kid. I think it would have been very foundational to me if I'd read it as a child. But I am a firm believer in you read the book when it's time for you to read it. And so there's like a lot of books where I'm like, oh, if I would have had this as a child, that would have changed things for me. But I'm still just really glad to read them as an adult. They were just as much fun, I think. And I hopefully haven't developed any complexes about them. So maybe that's for the best. Actually, maybe that's for the best. Okay, I read a second book, and this was a graphic novel by Robin Ha, called Almost American Girl. It's a graphic memoir. She grew up in Korea, and her mother suddenly moved her without much explanation to Alabama. I read Robin Ha's Fox Maidens, which is a fantasy graphic novel, and I loved it. It's like one of my favorite books ever. And so I wanted to like read something else of hers. I really like her illustration style. And so this is just kind of a memoir of her time when she was probably like 13 or 14. She grew up in Korea, and her mother suddenly moved her without much explanation to Alabama. So you can imagine the culture shock, besides the fact that she didn't speak English very well. But her whole life gets kind of upended. And so it's really about her struggles adapting into American culture and like high school also. Like that also is like, it was just like 17 different punches all stacked up in one. But it was really great. It was a really moving piece about her own identity and forging her own identity, but also in the midst of like a really helpless situation where she can't just go back to her old life. She has to stay in Alabama and figure out what she's going to do. And so it's a really wonderful story about a teenager finding some way to, find her own path and her own interest in her own friend group. And so it's kind of a classic coming of age in that way. But then you also have Robin dealing with her relationship with her mother, who was a single mother. There was a lot of stuff in there about how South Korean society views single motherhood and kind of broken families. And I use that really lightly. But it was a really great kind of cultural snapshot of that specific issue in South Korea. And an origin story for a graphic novelist that I really enjoy. So I highly enjoyed that one. I don't normally read memoirs, but if I am going to read them, I'm going to read them in graphic novel format. I don't know why I can approach them better that way. That was a really fun one. It was really beautifully illustrated, wonderful story about overcoming adversity and seeing your parents as fallible human beings, and not holding that against them as much as you might want to. on Tuesday, I picked up a book called Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. A princess has to get married to a prince. And but the twist, of course, of this one is princess has to get married to a prince and falls for his sister instead. So I was seated for that. It's a YA fantasy. It came out, I think, like 2016-ish. So it's a little bit of an older YA fantasy. And I tried to read it before and just like didn't really get that far with it. But again, I believe that you read books when you need them. And I needed this one bad when I finally picked it up again. So one of my reading challenges is to try to read down my physical TBR, which actually is all of the books on these two shelves. And so that was one that was on there. It also was one that came highly recommended to me by Melinda Lowe, who is another YA author, who I met at a workshop in January. I love Melinda Lowe's books, and so she's like, well, then you would need to read Of Fire and Stars. It's a classic of sapphic YA fantasy. It was one of the first after Melinda Lowe published Ash and Huntress, which are both sapphic YA fantasies. And it's a kind of a classic, like early, or I guess mid 2010s YA fantasy of like courtly stuff and like very classic kind of world building magic. So Princess Dianna shows up. She is a magic user. She's hiding this because in the country that she's moving to, they do not like magic users. The reason of why was not very explained, so I'm not entirely sure like what the beef is between magic users and non-magic users in Minaria, but she's a magic user. She's not allowed to use her magic, and so she's like kind of hiding this, but she's like it's very emotionally triggered, and she's obviously feeling very emotional throughout this book, and so that was a great source of tension for that to happen all the time. And she is engaged to the prince Thandy. I think his name was Thandy, which I thought was a weird name, but whatever. And Thandy's sister Mare is the princess, Thandy's older sister. She's got a name for herself as being sort of a court outsider. She's not very interested in politics. She's not very interested in courtly life. She just wants to ride her horse. Let her do that. So Mare and Dianna are like, they start out kind of as not really rivals or enemies, but they don't like each other. Dianna like is thrown off by Mare because she's so much different than how Dianna was raised, and so she like just feels very uncomfortable around her. And Mare is like, oh, Dianna is a princess snob and she sucks, and like just like has these all like preconceived notions about who Dianna is because of how she looks and how she was raised. And so they start off like not friends at all, and it takes in my opinion, a little bit too long for them to become friends and then eventually lovers. But once the foot was on the gas, we were going, and I was seated. I loved it. The chemistry between them was beautiful. They had such a great like banter and like rapport with each other. They really worked really well together. It wasn't like, oh, Mare is like, this badass and Dianna is just like an idiot princess who only knows how to dance. Like Dianna had her own really important strengths that Mare recognized, and that they were able to play off of each other really well the whole time. And so they sort of get involved with each other when one of the king's brother is killed. And Dianna witnesses it, and this is the king's brother is Mare's uncle, and so she's very close to him, and she's very upset about this. And they sort of get involved in the sort of magic user versus no magic users, and like there's intrigue and there's plotting and there's villainy, and it's beautiful. And like I said, the chemistry between those two was just impeccable. It was very similar, I think, if you are an Arcane watcher, very similar to kind of a Kate and Vi energy, where the closer they get to each other, the more they're like, I can't be attracted to her, she's annoying. But then they obviously are deeply in love with each other and they'll be together forever. And so I really, really enjoyed this novel. I'm not a big YA fantasy reader anymore. At least I haven't really enjoyed any like contemporary YA fantasy that I've read in the past few years. But this one was great. I put the second book on hold at the library. It's a duology, and I will be locking into that post haste. On Wednesday, I read The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. So it's really like it was like a really bad sandwich made with really good bread. This is a newer release. I think it came out maybe in May or April. It's like within the past couple of months. So the premise is that it's about this woman who is a magician, I guess. I don't remember exactly which terms they use. I don't think she used the term witch, but she's like an enchanter, a sorceress, I guess, in modern day England, and she runs a boarding school for magical children. So I'm seated with that premise. I love a sort of the twist on the sort of like dark academia kind of energy where we're reading from the professor's point of view. I think was really fun. And it was a great idea. And she's an older heroine. I think she was like 38 in the novel. And so that's also something you don't really see a whole lot in contemporary fantasy. But Incandescent just like didn't work for me. There were parts that worked. The first third was great. I loved it. It was intriguing. It was interesting. It was exciting. There was mystery. The characters, you were just kind of getting to know. There were a lot of characters. There was a woman with a sword, a butch with a sword. I'm locked in. I'm locked in. Say less. I was going to finish just for her. Great setting in rural England. Cancel me if you want. I'm an Anglophile. I love the aesthetics of England. And so I really enjoyed being able to kind of read into that specific environment. And I loved school. Hey, sue me. So I enjoyed reading a school setting that was not from the perspective of a student. I think it was really fun to read it from the perspective of an adult. So Safi Walden is the director of the boarding school. She participates in the sect of magic that's about evoking demons and like summoning demons and using them to perform magic. And her sort of work rival is Laura Kenning, who is basically the head of security at this boarding school. She's a demon hunter. She has a sword. Guys, she has a sword. Hey, Laura has a sword. Just by the way, Laura has a sword. She's really hot. The sword. And she and Safi kind of butt heads on how to protect the school from demons. So the first half of the book is kind of about their rivalry and about this one demon that sort of like hangs around the school the most. He's called Old Faithful, and he like haunts the school the most. He's like the big bad that's hanging out there, has been hanging out there for centuries. And so the first third of the book that I really enjoyed was about them dealing with him getting into trouble and starting shit. And I think the tension of that section was really good. The sort of chemistry between Laura and Safi was really good. Guys, she has a sword. There's a specific student that gets kind of wrapped up in it. And so explaining her character, I thought was pretty well developed in the first third of the book. Where she lost me was the middle, because they deal with Old Faithful really quickly and Laura leaves. So why am I reading if Laura is gone? Laura has taken her sword and she's left the building. Why am I still reading? And so the middle of the book really sagged for me because it was about Safi kind of dealing with the aftermath kind of getting rid of Old Faithful, because this big demon is gone. Now they're worried about other demons kind of filling in the vacuum that Old Faithful made and kind of creating all of this conflict and issues with, young magicians, and demons love young magicians. And there is a second, I don't even want to call it secondary romance. There is a second romance between Safi and the guy that the school hires to act as like a consultant since Laura has been fired. He's like a security consultant. He's like very posh British old money. He is a military contractor and he's a man. So it was really I think that was a fight that that Emily Tesh was never going to win with me because like I said, Laura has a sword. So and she's a woman. Hey, bisexuals, y'all are strong. Y'all are God's strongest soldiers. I'm so proud of you. It can never be me because like I said, Laura had a sword. So she really was not able to sell me on that romance the whole time. I was like, this guy is skeevy. And so like that kind of wasn't very rewarding to me to have that part like figured out in that second third. But the last third of the book fucking rocked. It was great. I wish more of the book had been that and less with like this fake romance with a military contractor. And in general, like not much was going on in the middle. There was not much plot. There was not much action. It was just kind of them waiting for something to happen, but like the thing that happened wasn't what anybody was expecting to happen. And so it like just felt kind of, it was really awkward to me to go from like a really boring middle to a really exciting ending. But I really liked the ending. I thought it was very satisfying and it was fun. It was a lot more experimental in craft, which I really love. I'm always going to enjoy somebody taking a risk in the actual writing and the craft of a novel. So that was fun. And and also there was like some parts where I'm like, girl, I do not actually care how a boarding school is run. And so I did skim a lot of sections where she's just talking about like how to be a good teacher and kind of like waxing philosophical about like what it means to be a teacher and how to be a successful teacher. If you are a teacher, you probably would love that because you could recognize a lot of what like you experience and you believe about teaching in those sections. I think it probably could have been cut out. I think it was a little heavy-handed sometimes. Hey girl, there's a demon and there's a hot lesbian with a sword. Why? I don't care about grading papers. But overall, really fun read. It was pretty quick. And I'm still going to give Emily Tesh more chances, but I probably won't give her another chance on a boarding school book. On Thursday, I read Tread of Angels by Rebecca Roanhorse, which is a fantasy novella about a sort of Wild West inspired city. I love Rebecca Roanhorse. Love, love, love the Black Sun series. I think it's one of the more genius pieces of fantasy literature that's come out in the past, I'm going to say it, 50 years. It's genius. And so the Tread of Angels is a Wild West inspired fantasy that is about this town that was the site of the battle between angels and demons. I'm just now realizing I read a lot of demon books this week. I don't normally read demon books, but here we are. So angels and demons fought here at one point. The magic is based off of angels and demons, and they don't like each other because they're angels and demons. We'll get to that. The plot focuses around Celeste, who is a card dealer at a saloon, and her sister Mariel, who is a singer at that same saloon. The novel opens with one night where Mariel is arrested for murder by the sort of like angel cops. And the rest of the novel is about Celeste trying to free her. There's also like a demon romance involved. It didn't work for me. I think maybe if it was expanded into like a full novel, possibly it would have worked, but there just was not enough space for the complicated world building that was going on. I did not understand the beef between angels and demons. Hey, I know what you're thinking. Abigail, we all know the beef between angels and demons. And yes, that's correct, but we're reading a fantasy book, and so the author's job is to explain to me and then to convince me that the circumstances of this beef. You can't go in just expecting people to be aware of Western Christianity mythology and to kind of use that to like, you can't rely on them to fill in the gaps. And I don't feel that this book adequately explained what the hell was going on between those two. I think it also falls prey to the same issue I've seen in other books that try to write about angels and demons in a fantasy world, is that, hey girl, that shit doesn't make sense outside of our reality. It doesn't. I think it could if the author tried really hard to write and to world build and to develop these creatures and their mythology and outside of the Christian tradition. But when you take it outside of the Christian tradition, say that 5 times fast, Christian tradition, it doesn't make sense. You're relying too much on your reader to fill in the blanks of this mythology. Again, I think that's probably something that's way too big for a novella to handle. Didn't work for me at all. And so that was like a really big hang up for me. I also feel like we didn't actually get to know Muriel or Celeste well at all. And Celeste was like very hung up on, I have to save my sister. I have to protect my sister. I have to look out for my sister. And there was no like real context for why she believed that. And when you're trying to sell that to me as the reader, I have to be able to point to places in the text where that makes sense for that character to believe. And I don't feel like that happened here. Again, I think she was relying too much on people having siblings that they loved, which is my personal experience. But if you don't have a sibling, or if you have a bad relationship with a sibling, that's lost on you. And so from that perspective, I just think it was not effective. And so the stakes were lost for me. The tension was lost for me because I didn't understand why Celeste was willing to die for this. And dying is high stakes. So you have to be able to explain to me why in the text that is what they believe. And I just don't feel like this did that very effectively. The writing itself was beautiful. The world was interesting, and I wanted to know more about it. I liked the setting. I liked the environment. I liked kind of all of the details that she added into the world, but I think character-wise, it wasn't there, and kind of going far enough to explain how the politics of this world didn't work either, because it was about someone trying to prove their innocence. And if I don't understand why the laws are like what they're like, it's hard for me to buy into it and to feel the tension and feel the stakes the way that I'm supposed to. So mid book for me. I also for some reason thought it was sapphic and it wasn't, and so that was a huge fucking bummer, but that was on me. But overall, like, very mid novel for me, which was a bummer. On Friday, I finished Last Call by Elon Green, which is a nonfiction book about a series of murders of queer men that took place in New York in the early 90s. I got in a little over my head with this one because not only was it about people dying, it was about queer people dying, which hit a little close to home. And there was very gratuitous explanation and description of like the murders themselves and the condition that the bodies were found in, which was a little much for me, I have to say. I think we could quickly say the body was dismembered and not have to go into super vivid detail about what that might look like. This was something I had not ever heard about, the Last Call killer, as they dubbed him. And I also will say I do not normally read true crime. I'm doing a reading challenge with my local library that's 100 books, and they have 100 prompts. And so I'm trying to read some stuff for prompts that I normally would not necessarily pick up. I don't love true crime. I really don't watch it that much, especially if there's like murder of women involved. And like I said, I don't normally read true crime, but I wanted to I'd heard about this book and I wanted to read queer-centric true crime if I was going to read it, just because that's something that's not really talked about. And obviously the queer community has plenty of crime going on to them all of the time. And so I think it's important to talk about those things and to bring those things to light, especially because true crime has like really been weird the past couple of years. Maybe it's always been weird and I just haven't been paying attention, but especially in the past couple of years, there's been a sort of like online-ness to the true crime world that I don't love. That being said, this book fumbled so fucking badly for me, and I don't know what happened. I've never read any of Elon Green's other works, and so I do not know if this is just his style of reporting and writing, or if this is like a special case. But I just felt like the whole book, it was very short, was so cold. It was so focused on being objective with giving facts that it completely sailed over the human element of this fucking story, which is severely disturbing to me, considering like the subject matter. Like it is about queer people being murdered because they are queer, and it was very much focused on the sort of gay and lesbian nonviolence movements that were taking place in New York in the 90s. This is at the, following the AIDS epidemic. It's following, what was that orange juice bitch that was so fucking hateful and trying to get gay people killed? I can't think of her name. May she burn in hell. So the whole atmosphere is that this is something that needs to be handled with care. And this is something that the whole core of it, the reason that these men kept disappearing and no one was fucking doing anything about it, is because of this apathy towards queer people and seeing them as less than human and seeing them as criminals and deviants and people who, if bad things happen to them, they deserve it because of who they are and how they live. And so for there to be just a complete lack of like human connection in the story was really bothered me a lot. They're just like, there were all of these facts about the victims, but there was no human element. There was no sort of authorial care about them as people. And I know that like traditionally nonfiction is supposed to be very blunt and very objective, and you're not supposed to be able to see the author. I don't know, it just put a really bad taste in my mouth about the whole thing, and I don't feel like it was handled with the care that it should have been handled with. It was way too objective, it was way too clinical, it was way too cold, it was far too focused on delivering the facts of history or the crime scene facts than it was on the fact that these men were brutally and horribly murdered because they were queer and no one gave a shit about it. And so their murders were not solved for decades. And it just was weird to me. And I didn't like how he dealt with the topic. I think it's hugely important that it exists and hugely important that people can read about this and learn about. I learned a lot about like bar culture and club culture in New York for queer people in the 90s, which I thought was really interesting. There was a lot about sort of the NYPD and all of these queer groups that fought homophobia. And there was a lot of queer history in there that was really important for me to learn about. But these were like people that were horrifically, brutally murdered, and they just were treated with like no empathy from the author at all. He didn't really talk to people who loved these men and knew these men, and he didn't really, I feel like, go try to get to know them as people. He gave you facts about them, but that's not enough for the reader to like really understand that this was a person just like anyone else they know, and not just like, some guy that was on have you seen this man poster. And another thing was that there usually in true crime books there are photos, either like of significant places, of the victims, of the murderer, whatever. This book had no photos in it, and so I had no idea what these men looked like. And I think that also contributed a lot to the sort of coldness that I sensed, was because there was no way for me to like look into their face and see them as a person and not just potentially a fictional person in a book. I very much feel like it was written for an award. Um, and it was written in a very old style of nonfiction true crime reporting, that I feel like has kind of fallen out of fashion a little bit. There is a documentary on HBO that it's called The Last Call, and it is based off this book, and it is brilliant. I highly recommend that you watch it if you're like remotely interested in this case. I recommend it over the book because all of the important people that are talked about in the book are in the documentary speaking for themselves, because like I said, this was in the 90s, this was not that long ago, all these people are still alive. And so the detectives are kind of talking about the case, and there are far more like personal testimonies from these people's families. One of the guys had been in a relationship with a man for like 11 years, and they had broken up shortly, like months before he was murdered. And he was not like, he was mentioned briefly in the book, but he wasn't like, they didn't talk to him. It was so confusing to me to be like, this guy was hugely important to this person. Like, why is there no testimony at all about him? but he was in the documentary, and it was beautiful, and it was so moving, and it was so harrowing and horribly sad. But it just went further to make these victims real people and not just victims that were dumped on the side of the road like trash. It's great. I highly recommend it if you're into true crime, or if you're into like the queer scene. That I think is a really important documentary for you if you're interested in that stuff. Don't bother with the book though. Saturday, which is today, I finished up my week of reading with a manga called A Man and His Cat. This is volume 1 by, I'm going to butcher this. Please be nice. Umi Sakurai. You can tell that this was written by someone who really fucking loves cats. So it was really cute to see all of the like them throwing litter out of the litter box, them eating too much, them like being just cute little cat things. And in particular, I really enjoyed the chapter where the cat sleeps in the house for the first time and he gets in the bed and the cat and the man like snuggle face to face, because that's exactly how my cat and I sleep. This is eerie. You can't talk about a man and his cat without without a woman holding her own cat. And she doesn't want to be here. Ow. Ow. I think there's like quite a few of these. I don't know that I'll keep reading them just because I don't really read manga that much. But again, for my reading challenge, I had to read a comic in translation, and obviously most manga is comic in translation. That's what I have read this week. A book a day, sometimes 2, for a whole week. I devoted myself to that. And it probably won't happen again. So in the future, I will probably cover this many books over a month, not over a week. So that's what I read. If you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments what you thought. Please like this video and subscribe if you're not already. And I'll see you guys soon. And so our main character, whose name I have forgotten, I think his name was Daryl. Hey, what's going on here? Darnell. I have forgotten a character name again. Hang on, I don't want to be looking down at my thing while I'm talking because... Oh, his name's Kat. Yeah, okay. I almost said Michael. His name's Michael. I read that on Tuesday evening. It was wonderful. Monday evening. I read that on Monday evening. Did I say Tuesday? I'm not stalling, but if I was, I think you would know why I'm stalling. Dr. Walden, the culture that... I have forgotten their names again.